Hello, everyone. A warm welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. How are you all? How's the reading going? Whether you read in print or whether you listen to the audiobook, hope that you're having just excellent times immersing yourself in the written or the spoken word. Anybody who is familiar with the channel knows just how much I enjoy roaming freely amongst the different kinds of mystery and crime fiction that at present, there's just so many wonderful texts to choose from. And I always love it when somebody says, "Why don't you?" And they did. I love history. And when fact and fiction are beautifully melded together, so that you lose yourself and yet you learn at the same time. Well, that is exceptionally special as far as I'm concerned. The author that's joining us today has done just that yet again. Leonora Nattrass, thank you so much for being with us. How are you today?
I'm fine, and thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. We're here to talk about your third published novel, Scarlet Town, published October 2023 by Viper, the third in a series. And I love how they've called it Poldark with a criminal twist. And again, what a fabulous thought. I mean, such an amazing series. And then to put that criminal element in. Well, I think your work does so much more than that. I'd like to ask, if I may, because I read that you'd lectured in literature and politics of the 18th century, and I just wondered, what was it about the 18th century that 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 drew you and keeps you captive even today?
I think the thing that really drew me initially was, well, first of all, it was the Romantic poets. So as an undergraduate, I did my dissertation on Romantic poetry, and then I went to University of York and did their MA in Romantic literature. And I think I think the Romantic poets are famous for kind of bringing individuality and the kind
Hmm.
of the poet's soul into poetry, so I think I felt a real connection with them as individuals and individual voices. And then as I began to read around the period, I realized how kind of recognizable it was, as opposed to kind of this slightly earlier period. Even really the early 18th century seemed a lot more alien, whereas the end of the 18th century, the Romantic period, really is when I think people begin to talk and write in ways that seem very kind of uh, identifiable to us now, and particularly with the politics, which I've written quite a lot about in all three books. The idea, it was the time of the French Revolution and just shortly following the American Revolution. So it was the time of the beginning of talking about human rights, which is obviously central to our kind of understanding of the world
Yeah.
now, whereas before it had been things like religion and stuff that kind of was the basis of the political discourse. So it attracted me because it was like that kind of moment when kind of modern voices, I thought, emerged.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I noticed as well that you published on William Cobbett, and again, I'm always intrigued why people choose things of all the people that you could have written about. Again, was there something special about William, or did it just follow on quite naturally from what you'd been looking at anyway?
I think I can't really remember how I actually found out about him. I think one of my lecturers at York recommended that I looked at him because I was very interested in the revolution debate between Burke and Paine that kind of fired off after the French Revolution broke out, discussing, what the French Revolution meant for Britain and whether Britain should kind of follow suit. So I'd been kind of interested in the ways in which Burke and Payne kind of tried to persuade people with their use of language, because that was what, I'm a literature
Mm,
academic, so I'm
mm,
interested in language. And then I think one of my lecturers suggested I look at Cobbett, and he was so fascinating because Eventually, later on in 1816, he more or less invented the popular press. He published something called the Twopenny Trash, which was aimed at ordinary working people to read, and it was really the first kind of time that that had been done in a mass way. He had a huge circulation, and his whole remit was that he wanted to kind of challenge the idea that that you had to kind of know Greek and Latin to have any input into politics, or that you had to own land, you know, which was the basis of the vote, as in
Mm.
a lot of places. So and the way he did it was this very kind of conversational, often very funny style, and I just found it really, really interesting, just both in terms of what he was saying, but also how he was saying it.
Yeah. Can I just say, even in what you've told us now, he sounds like my kind of guy. That idea of making things accessible for people, and the value of people, not what they have, but who they are, and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I must thank you, because having looked at your work, it makes you think, I have to have a wee look at this, William, because I think he might be a one for me. I have one last question on details that appear in the bio. And again, I think in these 4 or 5 lines, such things to be intrigued about. First of all, it says that you're now living in Cornwall in a 17th century house with 17th century drafts. The beams look beautiful, actually, huh? Don't they?
It is
So
very crafty though.
yeah, and the weather is changing, is it not? But tell me, what that it all seems like very much like an adventure, Leonora, to maybe leave a certain way of life behind and head into something new. When you did that, were you ready for a challenge of different kinds?
Yeah, I was, yes, and I dragged my entire family behind me. They had to come too. So my husband was a solicitor, and I was teaching. I was an academic, and I really didn't feel I was cut out for it. And I'd always wanted to write fiction, although that did happen as a part of kind of breaking away and running away, but a bit later. But anyway, I think having the other thing about Cobbett is that he wrote a book called Cottage Economy, where he talked about baking bread, raising animals, growing
Yeah,
vegetables, and we'd done that in a small way and where we'd lived up the line. But then I do think I just, it seduced me totally as in my 20s. So I was just kind of desperate to get away to my idea of a rural little, and so we packed everything in, and we ran away to Cornwall, and we had no idea whether we'd be able to make a living here
yeah.
or anything. So we could have had to go back very ignominiously, but we started a company making craft beer with a bloke that we met down here, and
Excellent.
yeah, and we did that for a few years, and then I managed to get myself out of that so I could start writing sort of more full time, which is what I've been doing for the last few years. My
That's great.
son's taken my place, which is quite nice.
That's wonderful. Again, I get so excited by people following their dreams, and how wonderful it is when it works out, and maybe it works out even better than you'd envisaged, or things like that. I love that. I also read about sheep. Are you still keeping the sheep?
Yeah, yes we do. In fact, I'm modeling my.
I wondered. Yeah, yeah. So Ryland sheep.
Yes,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like teddy bears. They were the sheep. The Queen Elizabeth I would only have her stockings made of Ryland wool because it wasn't itchy. uh,
Hmm.
and they're very lovely, and they're very docile and very friendly. So we have a very small flock of them, and I mess about with the wool.
Thank you for sharing about this part of your life. I know we're here to talk about your writing, but again, the idea of finding out what an author is passionate about, what moves them, as well as the writing. So thank you. Um, Anybody who's familiar with your writing, will know, of course, that your first novel, Black Drop, was Times Book of the Year, and your second, Blue Water, was a Waterstones Thrill of the Month and longlisted for the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year. It is no doubt that your writing is acknowledged and acclaimed. I wondered, you mentioned how you'd wanted to write for so long. Was this the kind of writing that you envisaged doing, or had you seen yourself writing something else when it was still just but a dream?
Uh, no, I hadn't envisaged doing this initially. Tried to write very kind of very almost kind of Raymond Chandler like, really, you know, sort of
Mhm.
understated kind of literary fiction, very very short, very terse, and of course, and that didn't get me anywhere. So, but you know, but people said nice things about my actual writing,
Okay.
so that
Uh-huh.
kept me going. And then I went to lots of sort of writers' conferences and one-to-ones with agents that you can, you know, that you can do, and got advice. And then my husband said to me, why not actually write about this historical period that you've spent 15 years immersed in, you know? And that was because at least it's something that's a bit different and that you know about, and that you can maybe bring something to, you know, something to that's a bit different. So I thought, oh, that's a good idea.
Mhm.
But it still took quite a long time to then work out how to actually, you know, writing historical mysteries, which, you know, which was when it all really clicked into place.
I am absolutely thrilled again, that your husband, I think when our loved ones support us in what we're doing and provide, maybe that insight that, we just can't see because it's right in front of us. Excellent, excellent. So that time period, uh, the book that we're going to talk about, Scarlet Town, the date is 1796. And as you said, all about that time of international upheaval, a time of revolution, what might be going on. Third book, and I wondered, having set up the premise of your main character, Lawrence Iago, and we'll come back to him and have a lovely look at him and who he is. Having already had so much success, were you concerned what would happen with this? Were you worried that, oh, it's been good so far, or was this book already in waiting, and it was just a natural next step for you?
A bit of both, really. I mean, I knew that I'd come across the story and I thought it was a brilliant vehicle for another Lawrence book,
Mhm.
but it was pretty daunting because I was really proud of Blue Water, and the fact that it got picked up by Waterstones and everything sort of was lovely, because I sort of thought to myself, I think this is better than Black Drop, you know, that I'm getting better.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then so I was really chuffed to have that kind of you know, kind of endorsement. But then, of course, it does put the pressure on, because then you think, well, what if the next one isn't so good? So I have kind of been, yeah, I was worried all the way through about whether it was going to, you know, because there was something very joyful about Blue Water, because it was the second book in the contract, and I'd, you know, after having been trying for a number of years, like lots of writers, I
Mm,
just felt, I think a lot of people find the second book difficult, but actually I just loved it because I had a contract, I knew it was going to be published,
yeah.
and I just wrote it in a great burst of joy. So I was kind of thinking, you know, will I ever sort of recreate that kind of joyful exuberance that's in Blue Water? But I hope it does in its own, it's different, you know, I've tried to make each book different, which helps.
Great. I think that is so important. Whilst appreciating an author's style, or an author, a voice, I really admire authors that can, especially if it's a series as well, can bring us something different with each book. I mean, I think that in itself, I mean, A, to be able to write, but then B, to give that different slant or something. Yeah, beautiful. So let's talk about Lawrence. And first of all, was he there before you began the stories, or as you began to write Black Drop, did he emerge?
The very first scene I wrote in Black Drop, which didn't end up in the original book, in the final book, was a scene where he meets Philpott, who's my kind of William Cobbett character. He meets him at a market in Helston, which is where Scarlet Town's set, and they meet and get to know each other by a pen of sheep. And so Lawrence was always there, but his character developed and changed, and I had to kind of really get to grips with him, because Philpott was quite easy to invent, because he was based on Cobbett, and
Yeah.
he just came very naturally, like strode into the room, and was himself straight away. But with Lawrence, I had to kind of do a bit more thinking about how to make him the kind of focus, and how to make Lawrence the kind of the thing that created the dramatic tension, the dramatic predicament of the book. It had to be something about Lawrence's own life that led to all his troubles, and it took me a little while to work that out. But his general character was there right from the beginning.
And as he's developed and gone on in, into three books, how do you feel about him? I mean, do you feel closer to him than when you began? Do you feel you know him better? Has he become somebody that you think, guy, or are you a little bit concerned about who this man is before you?
No, I think he's very much. I mean, he's not me, but I certainly have a lot of empathy with his kind of, his the way he thinks about things and things. I think so. I really enjoy being in his company, and I have great plans for him if the series continues. Then
Yes, yes, wonderful. I love the sound of that. I was talking to my students the other day. We're looking at crime fiction in the Spanish speaking world, but I was asking them general questions about why and how does series work? What is it that people are looking for? And, characters that, even if we can't identify them, characters that we're intrigued about, characters that take us with them on their, journeys, quests, whatever. And I think in Lawrence, I think that's what you've done. It's like, what's happening now? Where are you at? And again, that dynamic between the two of them, I think that is really interesting as well. Um, because you mentioned about, we start to hear voices and we start to hear about aspects of life that we might be able to identify with more now in the time period that you write. And I was just thinking about the dynamic between two men, and supporting each other. Again, did you find their interaction, shall we say, has it always been a delight, or was it something that had to be wrangled?
Uh, it was pretty. No, it was pretty. It came pretty naturally, because they're different, and so Phil. So Lawrence's irritation with Philpott just seemed to kind of be a natural thing, and but also his enjoyment of him, which is exactly how I feel about Cobbett, and how I think the reader hopefully feels about Philpott, that they're absolutely infuriating sometimes, but you can't help loving them, and yeah. So, and then in Blackdrop, Philpott's really Lawrence's kind of savior almost in Blackdrop, and then in Blue Water they're stuck together on a ship, and Philpott helps and hinders Lawrence's investigations. And then in Scarlet Town they've fallen out. I'm not going to say why, but they've fallen out at the beginning. So that kind of just put a slightly different spin on
Mm.
their relationship, but still in the same kind of sparring, jokey way, but just with a bit more of an edge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Helston, Cornwall. Having been to the States, as you say, or having been to America, they come back right in Helston, and Helston back then. As you have researched the area, and the place, is there anything that you have been totally intrigued by that either shocked you or blew you away that you haven't been able to include in the book?
Oh, I mean, I think something I've found very interesting really is that Cornwall was the Falmouth was one of the main ports for America. So people were always kind of, coming and going, and Cornwall was a major area of tin mining. So it was actually the industrial heartland of the country actually at that time, rather than the rural kind of remote idyll that it is now. And it sent 42 MPs to Parliament, and there were so there were kind of like nobleman like the Duke of Leeds, who's in Scarlet Town, kind of
Yeah.
fighting over all these constituencies, trying to get control of them because it was a way of controlling who got into Parliament. But just the general kind of, the trace of history, that something that haven't included is apparently there's a place in Cornwall, just sort of near to Newquay, called Indian Queens. And I didn't really realize until I started researching all this that the reason it's called Indian Queens is that Pocahontas stopped there for a night on her way when she came to England with, is it John Smith, Captain John Smith?
Yeah.
So it's like, there's been all these kind of fascinating people kind of traveling through all the time, and the romance and the interest of that is something that I think is wonderful, and that hasn't really got entered the book, but was really fantastic to find out
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I'm struck by what you said about of it being that place, Falmouth being that place, that port, that point of departure. It, I would never have thought that, you know,
I think
thinking
it
of,
I think it must be to do largely with the winds. So, in the 19th century, I mean, I'm speculating now because I'm
okay,
not an expert on ships, but I think in the 19th century, when Liverpool became the main departure point for America, it was perhaps because there were more like steamships and things. Whereas if you're going to use the winds to get you across, the route went right down through I've forgotten now, and I wrote the book, Madeira, and then sort of swoops around the Caribbean and then comes up the east coast of America. So Falmouth was a good jumping off point for there,
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
get onto the trades once you got out of the channel.
yeah, and there's nothing in the way, is there? I'm thinking Liverpool and Ireland being in the way.
Yeah, maybe,
That,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. We'll come back to dry land though, and sorry, and to this sense of the backdrop of the story, those elections. Again, interesting as well, thinking about the times we live in, and the changing of, you know, electoral borders and things like that, maybe. But what is, for those of us who do not know or understand this, what is a rotten borough?
Okay, a rotten borough is basically, well, there are two kinds really, and a rotten borough is really a place where there have been historically MPs and an electorate, but the electorate's actually gone. So the famous example of that is Old Sarum, in where there was a town, a village or a small town that sent an MP to Parliament, or I think two MPs, yeah, two MPs to Parliament, but over the course of the centuries, everyone left. So by the 18th
Yeah.
century, it was just a huddle of ruined houses and a field, but it still sent two MPs to Parliament. So basically, in the 18th century, 19th century, famously, two brothers bought all the buildings and the field, elected them, stood as candidates, elected themselves as the electors, and sent themselves back to Parliament. So that's a rotten borough where basically the sort of rationale for people, for a place being a constituency and sending people to Parliament has disappeared. And there was another one in Suffolk where half the constituency was underwater; it had been eaten away by the sea. And then a pocket borough is where there's a small electorate who are able to be kind of controlled by usually a aristocratic overlord. So in Helston's a pocket borough because basically in Scarlet Town there were two voters. In real life there was only one at this point. And they're basically just almost employed by the Duke of Leeds to send to vote for the people that he wants to be sent to Parliament.
Okay, so political intrigue. As if we didn't have enough of that in real life, but it's great. Again, these stories that provide great entertainment, but insight into how lives were lived. Sadly, um, both both of the candidates come to an unhappy end. I don't think it's giving anything away. It's there in the blurb. Um, do you enjoy killing characters off?
Well, my editor Miranda Jewis is a kind of, she loves the more elaborate and the more gory the way that your victims are dispatched, the happier she is. So she's a great inspiration to kind of think of different ways of, yeah, bringing about murders. And it's great, it's part of that thing of kind of trying to do something different with every book, is trying to come up with a new way to dispatch one's victims.
If I remember correctly, the second victim, it looks like they've been poisoned. Um, I'm thinking of the work of Alice Hawkins. She's been doing recently, and poison being involved. Have you done that kind of research that would get you into bother if people looked at your searches?
I don't think so, because I think I can't. It's very difficult because I don't want to say what
I
the
I, I know,
point
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah.
But I think it's been quite well documented on things like TikTok actually recently. So I think it's reasonably mainstream. So I think I'm okay.
It's yeah, you're safe. I think you're safe. It's out there in the public domain. Should
Yeah.
people, but yeah, no. We were talking the other day as well about these books that are coming out, like How to Murder Your Husband, and things like that. Yeah, do you start have to, put a little, never mind a trigger warning, if it's purely fictional. I have not. Um, so to the town doctor, that's Lawrence's cousin, Pythagoras. Leonora, seriously? Were people called Pythagoras at the time, or was there something you wanted to do with the character's name?
Well, it was a bit of a joke, but people did have all sorts of. Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I think it's probably quite. And because everyone was called by their surnames, weren't they? They were always Mr. Jago or Mr.
Yes,
Mr.
yeah,
Brown, so you could have
yeah,
preposterous first names, and no one would know.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, he gets suspected of evil ways. Again, it makes me think, when you were writing the book, did you always want him as a suspect, or did he sort of like stand out as you were writing and thinking, you'll do nicely?
A little. I think more that. Yeah, I think it came to me as I wrote it, because when I first sort of thought about the book, I thought about having him as a real person. There was a guy called Stephen Luke who came to Helston that in the summer of that election. The election actually happened in 1790. I kind of moved it
Uh-huh.
forward to fit in with Lawrence's sort of life story. But in 1790, about just a few weeks before the election, Stephen Luke came to Helston, and he was a really extraordinary character, and he was the grandson of a Penzance alderman, as Pythagoras Jago is, and he ended up being a physician extraordinary to George IV. So he had an amazingly kind of fantastic career, but when I first started thinking about Pythagoras, he was really based on this other bloke. So that kind of limited a bit of what I sort of thought I could do with him. But then as I kind of fictionalized him and made him a character in his own right, it occurred to me that, well, it was obviously the case that if poison was involved, who has access to poisons other
Yeah,
than doctors?
yeah, yeah,
So,
and the knowledge of what they might do,
yes.
or not do. Yeah, yeah. Writing at the time, having such an understanding of the time, is there any way you wished you could take, or wished at this point, or any of the other, novels that you've written, a desire to do something with them that time setting just won't permit it, because it wouldn't make sense?
No, actually, because that's what I find really interesting. And what I really enjoy trying to trying to write a world that is itself and that plays by its own rules, plays by the rules of the time, and
Mm.
doesn't cast a retrospective kind of shadow from the present, isn't kind of being read through 21st century eyes. I really try to go put myself there and leave everything else behind. So it really, in a lot of ways, I'm more interested in the ways in which people actually dealt with the realities of their time. So, things that we might see as limiting, how they would just accept that as just a part of life, and work around it, get on with things, make the best of the situation that they were in.
Yeah,
Like Bellingham, my heroine, who is fascinated by politics, but she doesn't think about becoming an MP herself. What she does is she thinks, how can I use my position as daughter of the Under Secretary of State for the Foreign Office to, influence things. So she works within the situation she finds herself in, and so do all the characters really, and
yeah.
that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, yeah. And I mentioned it at the beginning, the blending of those historical facts and your fictional story woven around that. Do you find that melding easy to do in the sense that it so that the book neither feels too fanciful nor does it feel too, much like a didactic text of here's what life was like in the 18th century, is working that, that alchemy. Do you take a lot of joy in that?
Yes, I do, and I think it's part of the great, one of the things that I realized when I started writing the books, and I was thinking about how to use this material and how to write something that people would want to read, was when I realized that this whole genre of historical crime. And I think that if the use of a kind of murder story, or something like that, is a real way of kind of, um, meaning that you don't have to do that kind of didactic
Mhm.
thing, because the fact that it's set then, it's all about the fact that it's set then, and things happen that could only happen then. Then they couldn't happen now. So it's not that you're just plonking it in the past for no reason, but at the same time, this story and the characters and the sort of excitement of the murder mystery, I think, hopefully, stops you going down too many kind of didactic rabbit holes.
Yeah, yeah. And I just think it flows so beautifully, and it carries you with it, which is great. Having written, the end, um, and the way the book goes, looking back on book three, which aspect makes makes your heart sing the most, or that you're proudest of? What might that be?
I think that the conjuring of the small town was what I really enjoyed with this
Mhm.
book. Like I said, every book's been different. So the first one was in the Foreign Office in London and the kind of dirty back streets of the city, and the second one was at sea. And what I really loved doing in this one was the town. And I spent a lot of time looking at censuses and all the parish
Uh-huh.
records and things, trying to work out what sort of people live there, how many people live there, and which houses the houses are still there. So which houses they inhabited, and really interesting things, like it turned out that the Helston was full of shoemakers, and I don't think I've heard anybody really talk about that.
Eh,
But obviously it was a big thing in the town. But so just that hopefully that kind of sense of the town as a living place is
mm,
comes across, and that was the thing that I really enjoyed doing.
mm. And for us as readers, I know, we have no control over anybody else. But if you had a desire that we took something from this book, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I mean, I think with all my books, I'm kind of interested in reminding people, that the past was different, and that it
Yeah.
wasn't just something that existed through our kind of 21st century eyes, and also that the struggle, particularly in Scarlet Town, and in Black Drop, the struggle for the vote, and the massive kind of sacrifices people made to kind of get us to where we are with universal
Mm.
suffrage. So those are, if I was being, grand, those would be my.
I think, I think that's
So
so
I
important.
think it's very important that people know that
Yeah.
there were such things as performing pigs.
And no notion of cruelty to animals or,
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
Actually, one of the characters in Black Drop, Erskine, the lawyer, he was one of the people that set up the RSPCA. So he was obviously a sound chap.
Yeah, yeah. And of course that performing pig is Toby. Um, I love that there, the sapient hog, the wise hog. Um, but you keep sheep. Would you ever, or have you ever kept pigs?
Yes. And the thing about pigs is that you don't really keep them. They kind of coexist with you. But if you know, they're just not interested in you at all. They're getting on with their lives, and if they
Yeah.
want to do something, they do it. And they're so big and strong that you can't stop them. So yeah, it's a negotiation living with a pig.
Leonora, we came to talk about historical crime fiction, and we've also brought in a little bit of husbandry there with sheep and the pigs. So I think this is so typical of you. That information that's there just to be relished, and even talking about these other aspects. It's really lovely. I'm aware of the time, and I'm very grateful that that you've come on to talk to us. I suppose my last question, because we always ask this of authors, um, this book, Scarlet Town, it long left your desk, for it to reach us. Um, are you busy with Lawrence in the next iteration of the story?
I hope to be next year, but actually, the last year I spent writing a standalone, just
Oh,
as a kind of way to ring up the changes. So
yeah.
the next book that's coming out next year is a standalone set in Westminster Abbey in 1774, so 20 years earlier than these books. And then hopefully, but I think Lawrence will return.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's great to talk about a trilogy because a trilogy has, you know, I don't know, it has that substance to it. But I think when an author has created, a series of characters, again, it's like, oh, oh, okay, and I think, and I think as a reading, a reading public, I know we can be demanding, and I know we can want things from authors that sometimes can be very unrealistic. But just that sense of, the world that you've opened up to us.
Mm. There's a series of about 20 books by Patrick O'Brien. His books about Aubrey and Maturin at sea in the Napoleonic Wars, and I really wish there were 50. So
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
just going back to those places and living with those characters again is always a real pleasure as a reader. So I hope people feel that about Lawrence. Though I don't suppose I'll write 50 or even 20.
But and yeah, and again, again, putting pressure and numbers and things, no. But it would be lovely to think that, that final word on him is yet to be written.
Oh, definitely, yeah, no,
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
with it.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. It's the first time that we've met, and again, I appreciate how open that you've been about so much. And I look forward to when we might do this again sometime.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you. Bye bye for now. Bye.